You can look at the NetBeans e-commerce tutorial for a graphical step-by-step description on how to use the entity classes from Database Wizard and the Session Beans for Entity Classes Wizard. But it's not that difficult. Here are the key things to remember. Both wizards reside in the persistence category of the New File menu option. When creating entity classes, make sure you have the correct data source, add all the tables, and don't worry if the wizard does not create classes for join tables. Those are the intermediate tables created in many-to-many relationships. We're not going to need them despite what the tutorial says. Make sure the entity classes are in the package entity. The entity classes will be created, and so will a persistence.xml configuration file. For the Session Beans for Entity Classes wizard, add all of the entity classes and make sure your resulting facade classes go into the session package. Let's look at the code created by these wizards. Category.java is the entity class that corresponds to the category table in the database. The first and second annotations here actually tell you that. The named queries annotation gives a series of queries, and it gives those queries names that the entity manager can use to retrieve entities from the database. Let's look at an example of how this might work. This code has the entity manager, EM, creating a named query based on the name category.findAll, provided in one of the named query annotations in the category.java code. The method getResultList returns a list of entities. The second parameter in the createNamedQuery method, class.category, indicates the type of the entities to be returned. If this were left out, a raw list of objects would be returned, and you would have to cast the entities in that list to category objects when you wanted to access them. Let's look at a second example. This one gives you an idea of how you handle parameters in queries. You do it by calling the method setParameter on the result of the getNamedQuery method. If you look at the JPQL query that corresponds to the name category.findByName, you see that it includes the string :name. That colon simply means that what follows is the name of a parameter. This class has 3 fields. 2 of them, ID and name, correspond to the column names of the category table in the database. The last one, product collection, corresponds to a collection of all products in the product table that have this entity's ID as their category ID. Remember that the product table has a column called category ID that holds foreign keys, namely the IDs from the category table. One of the nice things about the Create Entity Classes from Database Wizard is that it analyzes the database as a whole, and it can detect when one table uses the primary key of another table as a foreign key. Having easy access to all products associated with a particular category is something we need in the category page. If you feel inclined, you can look at the remainder of the code yourself in your implementation of the tutorial. Essentially, we have default constructors, getters and setters for each field, and an equals, hash code, and toString method. Remember that having getters and setters for each field means that the field names become properties, and we can access them in Java's expression language. Let's look at some of the classes created by the Session Beans wizard. The wizard creates a facade for each entity. A facade is an object that provides a simplified interface to a larger body of code. For example, the category facade will provide basic CRUD operations for the category entity: create, read, update, and destroy. But there doesn't seem to be any such operations in this file. That's because they're in the abstract facade class that this class extends. So let's take a look at the abstract facade. The type parameter passed into this class determines the entity class. For example, the category facade will have category as its entity class. The create, edit, and remove methods correspond to the create, update, and delete database operations. We'll focus on the find methods. The find method, as used by the category facade, takes an identifier, the primary key, and returns the associated category. The find all method, as used by the category facade, simply returns a list of all category records in the category table. There seems to be a lot going on in this method, but the second line is the key to understanding what is happening. It is similar to a select star from table query in SQL. Therefore, as used by a category facade, this line is roughly equivalent to select star from category. Once we have the entity classes and session beans, we can now simplify how we retrieve information from our database. Before we remove the SQL query tags from our .jsp files, we're going to store some information as attributes in our application scope and our request scope. And we're going to do all this in the controller servlet. Storing the information as attributes means that the objects that hold that information will be available in the Java expression language. First, we declare a category facade private variable. Notice that we have annotated the variable with @ejb, and we did not initialize it. The variable will be set using dependency injection. Next, we create an attribute named categories, which is the list of all the category records, and we add it to the application scope. Inside the doGet method, assuming the query string is not null, we get the category record that corresponds to the category ID. We also get the collection of product records that is associated with the selected category. For both of these objects, we add them as attributes to the request scope. Once you have the attributes you need, you can delete the SQL query tags and replace the results of those queries in EL expressions with the attributes set in the controller servlet. This is a fairly simple change. After you've made these changes, you can also remove the resources ref tag from your deployment descriptor, since this was needed only for the SQL query tags. The data source is still referenced from your newly created persistence.xml file. And that's it for this portion of the NetBeans e-commerce tutorial. Not a lot of changes were made to the code, but an extensive amount of new technologies were introduced, including EJB3, JPA, and CDI. I'll see you in the next section of the tutorial.